And a dancer all in one.
Specifically in the arts.
Taking risks.
Photography.
In the arts world.
The language is ASL.
Deaf what? Interview.
Digital originals. Krishna Madaparthi. I was born deaf. My family are all hearing except my older brother, who is also deaf. Most people think I'm older than him, but I'm not. I'm the younger one. Not a lot of people know that I have a deaf brother. Well, yes, I do have a deaf brother. When I was 4 and my brother was 7, our family moved to Canada because our family wanted to fix our ears as a quick solution to learning how to communicate orally. Having moved here, my brother and I were only previously communicating through gestures. We could carry our own conversations based on home signs that we developed with our family members. But when we got to Canada, it opened up a lifelong journey with sign language. Well, much like a roller coaster ride, it had downs and ups. It was terrible that the focus was to fix our ears and that our family placed us in an oral education program in a mainstream school. However, as I got older and I got placed in a mainstream support, I was the only deaf student and had no educational support. My main method of communication was writing back and forth in English and reading lips, and that continued until high school. Once I was in high school, I finally had access to an interpreter who used ASL, and I was finally allowed to comfortably use sign language. And as a high school requirement to graduate, we had to do 40 hours of community service. And what I did was I found a deaf center here in Ottawa known as the ODC, and in my summer, I volunteered at a deaf camp, and that was a turning point in my life. That was definitely the up part of the roller coaster in my life. Before, the car was rusty and the rail was unstable. Now the roller coaster is going up and I'm on top of the world. I know where I stand with my deaf culture, and I especially thank my interpreter who told me all about the deaf community. Growing up, I didn't know anything about the deaf community, and I thought how I lived was normal. But once I went to that camp, it was my retreat from being the only deaf student at my school. Before I discovered the deaf community, I didn't know my path. And then afterwards, I realized I have different paths I can travel. Growing up, I considered myself as a hard of hearing person who had his ears fixed and used an oral communication method. Now, I don't identify with that anymore. I identify as a culturally deaf person. I studied information technology in college, and then my attention shifted to teaching ASL. I love sign language. Growing up, I was deeply fascinated and obsessed with technology. And then after I graduated, I found a job, but there was something missing. I was missing communication. I used sign language day and night, and I had been so linguistically deprived that I felt the need to use ASL on a daily basis in my adult life. I was missing sign language access at work, and that's why I've shifted into the world of ASL in my professional life. I love using my hands, and when I teach ASL, it feels good, and hopefully that means less language deprivation for my students. I don't want to stop using ASL, so I shifted my path away from IT, and life goes on.
From 3 years ago, I recall you mentioned that you worked for the federal government in Ottawa.
Yes.
Are you still working there?
No, I'm not. I almost had an interview with the federal government last year, but I didn't go for it. I instead decided to teach American Sign Language full-time, and currently I'm living in Japan. Before moving to Japan, I was studying at Gallaudet University. I was studying my master's in American Sign Language education, working full-time during the day and studying during the evening. Then I was offered a job in Japan, so I took that as a once-in-a-lifetime work opportunity, and I'm loving it so far.
Wow. Now you're currently in Japan. Which city are you currently living in?
I've been living in Tokyo for about a year now.
1 year already?
Yes, it's been 11 months so far. So it's about a year.
What made you decide to live in Japan? I know you mentioned about the job opportunity, but is there any other reason why you're
Well, back in my university days when I was studying IT, I frequently stopped by the ASL department to, hang out. When I went into the building where the language department was, I saw a wall full of flyers. And I saw opportunities for students to study abroad in Asian countries, such as Japan, Taiwan, Malaysia, and China. These opportunities were offered for those who taught English as a second language. I realized that hearing people have the same kind of opportunities, but was it the same for deaf? So I researched teaching opportunities available for deaf people. Around 4 or 5 years ago, I found out that there were paid opportunities for deaf people to teach ASL. Just like there are opportunities to teach English. At that time, I was not ready to commit for 1 year, so I continued my studies. But when I was teaching at night, this idea of teaching in Japan was stuck in my mind. So when I studied for my master's, I was required to take up an internship. At the same time, the opportunity to teach in Japan presented itself again, and I was so thrilled that a position became available, so I sent in my application. At that time, there was no government work available, so I decided to give Japan a shot.
Can you tell me about the differences in the Japanese deaf culture? Are there any similarities or differences?
Well, I thought that deaf culture looked the same all over the world, and I was wrong. Us deaf people really need to understand that cultures are different, and there's a strong presence of Japanese culture here in Japan, and there are many differences, culturally deaf or not. There is a mutual respect in the community. It took me a while to get used to the Japanese cultural differences as opposed to the Canadian and American ones, because there are many sign languages used in the deaf community. I believe that there are 4 sign languages that are commonly used in Japan, including hiragana, katakana, romaji, and others. And there's also a sign language that's only used in the West and one that's only used in the East. And I'm impressed because Japan is a very small country. And it turns out that each region has their own sign language. And they're all different.
Why do people want to learn ASL in your program?
That's a great question. There were concerns about ASL colonizing Japanese Sign Language. I am aware about the ASL colonization happening to the African deaf community, but that's not the case in this scenario. I decided to come here anyways, as I have a purpose to teach ASL. After class, I asked the students about the reasons why they wanted to learn ASL, and I know that in the Japanese deaf community, there's a bit of a challenge when it comes to languages. Usually the Japanese would learn English to make it more convenient for them to travel.
Oh.
But as JSL is so completely different from ASL, there's no similarities. Some students study both English and ASL so they can attend schools in the United States.
Oh, that makes sense. Schools like Gallaudet.
Yeah, schools like Gallaudet, RIT, CSUN, really any university, including Ohane University in California. So it's not just for universities that serve exclusively deaf students. Learning ASL is a great way to meet other deaf people because not so many people know JSL compared to ASL. They want to be prepared. If an ASL user happens to visit Japan, they want to be able to communicate with them. Some take up ASL classes just for fun. Some housewives learn ASL, but not JSL, which is interesting. Some people study languages to keep their brains running, learning a new way to think critically, like a mental exercise. Learning sign language is a hobby for some. Some people learn ASL to support their English learning. For example, fingerspelling can help students learn English words. It's a challenge for some of the students as fingerspelling is not so common in JSL. So these are some of the reasons why people learn ASL in Japan. It's not at all about ASL colonizing JSL. The deaf Japanese community continues to use JSL within their communities.
Do you have any news to share with the audience?
After graduating from university, I know that I'll be here in Japan for about a year or so. After that, I know there are a number of opportunities out there, so I'm keeping that in mind for the upcoming years. I would love to live on the East Coast in North America, like Boston, Massachusetts.
Continuing with your education?
Maybe. I was hoping for a full-time job and studying for the deaf culture certificate, perhaps. And I was thinking about EDD, a PhD that specializes in deaf education and deaf studies, or the learning curriculum teaching program. I've been thinking about a variety of different opportunities.
You really love academics.
Actually, I hate school. In high school, I exceeded my high school credits in volunteering hours. And then after college and university, I was done. Then I changed my mind and went ahead with my master's education, so I think I'll do one more program, then I'm done. We'll see when I finally have time to settle down.